to An Awful World, but not awful like you think.
This is the show where we discuss whether we would have discovered important advances in a world exclusively full of Haylies and Libbys. I'm Haylie.
And I'm Libby.
And today,
we're talking about
serial killers.
That sounds like a really upbeat way to talk about serial killers.
I mean, we are excited.
But we did it. We are excited. Again, this is just such an interesting topic.
Yeah.
To me, I know too much about them.
Season 2 is just starting out real spooky ooky.
Real heavy. Cults and serial killers, baby. But before we dive into serial killers, just wanted to remind you all that we are on Patreon. If you're unfamiliar with Patreon, it's a way for you to basically support your favorite content creators, help keep the podcast going. And there's some really fun things that you could get if you become one of our Patreons. So check us out. We have a couple of different tiers on our Patreon. It's patreon.com/anawfulworldpodcast. Remember, that's AWFHAL. Check us out there. But that's all I have to say in terms of housekeeping. Let's jump into serial killers.
Yes.
I have wanted to discuss this topic for so long because it's fascinating.
Why don't you go ahead and start us?
Excellent. So, much like cults, serial killers are a fairly new phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that they didn't exist before we started paying attention? No, definitely not. But a pretty new phenomenon. When law enforcement really started to catch on to this and study it as a thing, it was the 1960s. Okay. Not that long ago. Earlier than that, serial killers that I can think of, H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper are really the only two I can think of pre 20th century.
Well, H.H. Holmes is what they call America's first serial killer.
Interesting.
But there's someone who predates him and Jack the Ripper. I don't really remember when Jack the Ripper was, but
around the same time as H.H. Holmes.
Okay, so there's
a lot of speculation that they are possibly the same person.
Okay, but there was one before that in the 1400s.
Whoa.
Who is what they consider the first serial killer in recorded history.
Is it the French guy that knew...
Yes, Joan of Arc.
Yes, okay. Yes, I listened to a podcast about him.
Is it Giles or Giles de Rais?
What's his last name again?
De Rais.
Yeah, I think it's Gil de Rais.
Gil de Rais, okay.
Yeah.
It's spelled Giles.
Yeah.
So I was like, is this Giles?
Yes.
Giles? You know the French, they never pronounce anything the way it's spelled. Mm-mm. Makes it very difficult to learn.
But super fun.
Yes.
Yes, I believe it's Gil de Rais. If you want to know more about Gil de Rais, because it's a fascinating topic, check out Last Podcast on the Left.
Ooh.
They have, I think, maybe a 4 or 5 part series on him. But that's literally the only other serial killer I can think of that predates the 20th century.
Yes.
So that's kind of an interesting thing. If you are familiar at all with the book and then later the television show Mindhunter,
which I am not.
Cannot recommend enough. First of all, let me just say it's Jonathan Groff, who is an amazing actor, is in the Mindhunter TV series, which is on Netflix. But it's essentially about the sort of the inception of serial killer profiling with the FBI. And it is a book that is written by the real guy who kind of started the whole thing. So that's a fascinating look into kind of the early study of it. Mm-hmm. And they really start out with a serial killer that you may not be super familiar with, Ed Kemper. He was very talkative with the FBI. And so they kind of started studying his answers and his crimes and all this stuff.
I love when they're like that.
I know.
When they get real chatty. I mean, you're cooped up in jail all day, I'm sure.
Right.
You've already been convicted. You might as well.
We'll get to some of that later.
Yeah,
because I have some things to say about that. But something interesting about serial killing is that it's the rarest form of homicide. So what technically defines a serial killer is that it's 3 or more people that you've murdered, and some sort of cooling off period in between.
Yes.
So not today we're very familiar with mass, murders or mass shootings often that technically is a mass killer, not a serial killer. Even though it kind of seems like it's like...
Because it's one event.
Correct.
It needs to be 3 separate events over a long period of time, at least 3, before it's considered.
Right. So I wrote down, like, why the 1960s? Why is this suddenly a period where we're exploring this? And so I think a lot of this relates to, like, urbanization of America. Like, we're basically having, like... people are moving to cities and there's so much more anonymity than there ever was before.
Yes. And they're all just so close together. It's so easy to just pick one out.
Just pluck somebody from the crowd.
Exactly.
But also because, urbanization, and think about this, with H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper too. So like not the 1960s, easily 100 years before. But is that people used to like know their neighbors. Yes. Everybody knew everybody in the town and their story. And so it would be very, very difficult for something to happen to one of those people and one of the other people not be like the main, culprit or suspect in that.
Yes.
But Jack the Ripper, that happens in London. So it's, very much like, there's a lot of transient people. Those people were sex workers often that he murdered, which we'll talk about more later. And then H.H. Holmes, of course, was in Chicago. So again, same situation. He was operating a hotel, actually. So like that's a lot easier for you to like snatch those people up because of the anonymity of all of it. So also something about the 1960s that really starts to ramp up this like serial killer, the frequency of it, but also the popularity. I don't want to say popularity, but like the fascination with it is the media.
Yeah.
The freaking media.
Which... As somebody who has a degree in journalism, I see both sides of it. Yeah. And it's so hard because as a journalist, your job is to report on these things.
Right.
And it's literally just to be like, hey, here are the facts. You need to know this. You need to stay safe. Like this thing happened. This is a big deal. You need to know. But then on the other side of it, it's very much a lot of serial killers. What they're doing is trying to get attention.
Yes.
And they want the attention, but they don't necessarily want you to know it's them at first.
Yes.
A lot of times that's how they get caught.
Yes.
Is because they get so enthralled in the
cat and mouse game.
Yes. And that's how they get caught.
Yeah.
But so a lot of times a lot of people question, well, why is the media giving these people attention? Why are they showing their faces? Or why are they showing the note that was left? Or, the things that they did? Why are they telling you those? And it's like, well, you need to know so that you can stay safe.
Right.
And that you can be aware of these things. But also, and if they don't tell you those things, then they're accused of hiding it.
Right.
But it is also very much like, well, yeah, we shouldn't show them because that is exactly what they're like getting off on.
Right, for sure. End. And I totally agree with you that it's the responsibility of the media, or at least it should be, to give you the information that you need to know to stay safe. But part of the problem, I think, by the time 60s, 70s, 80s rolls around, media is starting to sensationalize things.
Yes.
And so things become much more dramatic and also fear sells, okay? Yes. That's going to sell newspapers. That's going to sell magazines. That's going to make people watch your news broadcast as if you're, selling that like, oh my God, it's mass chaos. It's, this is happening around us. Lock your doors type of situation, right? So that really accounts for the uptick of the serial killer. I think, honestly, modern day, we don't really have serial killers anymore. It's much more
that you know of.
That we know of. That's true. But I think it's so much harder probably to be a serial killer now.
Well, so something I saw was that like the 60s through the 2000s were what they considered like the golden age of serial murders. But so after the 2000s, they like the tech on like DNA, fingerprinting, that kind of stuff is really became popular.
Right.
And that is probably why we've seen less serial killers.
Yeah.
Now, really quick, side note, something I just learned. Did you know it is not true that everybody's fingerprints are different?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah. So apparently years ago, there was somebody who was in a completely different country and had never, ever left their country and was accused and charged for a murder of someone in a completely different country because their fingerprints matched.
Interesting.
And he was like, I've literally never left this country.
Yeah.
You can check.
Right. How could I have committed this crime?
Yes. And it's because him and this other person have the same fingerprint.
That's fascinating.
So I think it's like rare.
Yeah.
That it would,
For
you
sure.
know, but it can happen. But I think that like there was a scientist, whoever said the fingerprints are unique, I think it was kind of a like, I mean, chances are everybody, you know.
That they're all different.
And we all just took that as
Bible.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying go out and murder someone because you could just be like, well, the fingerprints, whatever. But just
be aware.
Be aware. Apparently, you could have the same fingerprints as somebody else.
I will say that I do think that law enforcement relies significantly less on fingerprints now, so much as they use like touch DNA.
Yeah.
Obviously, DNA is such a huge thing. I'm no expert on DNA and its use in solving crimes and homicides particularly. I don't know. I often wonder how much of it is like kind of junk science.
Yeah.
But I do know that, you know, with the rise of these like 23andMe and ancestry kits and all of this is how we've been able to sort of reverse engineer and get to a serial killer, which I think is really cool. So the Golden State Killer was only captured like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And it was because of that.
Oh, see, that icks me out though. Like it's very cool that they can catch somebody like that. But also I'm like, I'm not giving you my DNA.
I mean, yeah, I get it. I get it. I think it's fascinating though, like to figure out, you know, your genealogy and where you're from.
True.
I've always wanted to do one of those kits. I haven't, just because I've never had occasion to buy one or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure when you when you get those kits and you are shipping your spit off to these people, like there is some sort of statement that's like, and we're going to have this and we're going to keep it in a database type thing.
Yeah. And they're like, and we'll share it with the police and it's not a big deal.
It's like a big privacy issue.
Yes. To me, I'm like so icked out by that. And I know every year I feel like I become more and more the like old hippie man who's like
put on Facebook, like
trust your government and let's get off the grid.
Facebook can take all your information unless you share this post.
Yes.
I do not consent to Facebook taking my information.
Yes. But like every year I feel like I become more and more like, you know, of the man, whatever.
Right.
But also like I'm an attorney. My fingerprints are on file. They have to be to even take the fucking bar.
Yes.
So like, what does it matter?
Or to get a job.
Yes. And
like,
I'm sorry, but like my phone is listening to me.
Yes.
It just is.
That's literally what I was just about to say to you is like, unfortunately, the reality is that it's already so far gone.
Yeah.
Like the government already knows if they wanted to. I don't think that we live now currently in a society where we're constantly being watched by the government.
Big brother.
But I do think that if the government wanted to know something about you, they could easily figure it out.
I'm just saying that like my FBI agent would be like, oh, this girl's so sad. All she wants is shoes and chocolate.
Yes. And to watch her TikTok in peace.
Yes. Just let me have my TikTok.
Wants to know, they already know about me.
Yes, because Apple is giving them my information, not TikTok. TikTok isn't even owned by China.
It's just what it is.
China doesn't care.
No.
They don't care about me.
No.
They're like, she's just some other little white girl. Shut up.
She just wants to watch like recipes and dog videos.
Yes.
That's it. But anyway, we're getting away from the point. The point is, that's very interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
But I do think that is very much like a reason why it's gone down in frequency so much is because like, you know, even in 1995, I think, which is when O.J. Simpson allegedly, he did it, I promise you, allegedly killed his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ron Goldman. I know way too much about murders. But when that happened, I know that DNA was still kind of a like, you know, which is why they were relying so much on like does the glove fit type
the
thing.
The glove fits, you must acquit.
And they did acquit him criminally. But anyway, I do think that is part of the reason. I think it's getting a lot harder. But also, like, you know, like relying on this anonymity type thing. But then, you know, typically people who are victims of murder in general, but of serial murders, tend to be marginalized people. So kind of like I already said with like Jack the Ripper, they were sex workers. They're people that the serial killers think that nobody will miss this person or notice that they're gone for quite some time. And so those are the easy people to pick on. It's interesting because most murders, I would say probably 95% of murders, are perpetrated by a person that the victim knows.
Yeah.
So it's really, really unusual anyway to be the victim of some random murder. And then, you know, typically they just tend to be these kinds of people that the killer views as disposable.
Yes.
Sadly.
Now, and something else, just going back to Jack the Ripper, is so my husband Ty and I, last year we went to London and we did a Jack the Ripper tour. Now, it was the lamest tour I've ever been on.
I was so disappointed when you came back because I was like, oh my God, tell me everything about the Jack the Ripper tour.
It is so lame. But here's the thing, is it kind of adds to the like
mystique.
Yes, the mystery of Jack the Ripper. But then at the same time, you're like, why are we doing this tour? Like, you don't even know if that's his name.
What do we
like,
actually know about this?
Like, literally nothing. Yeah. We know that there were at least 5 women, most of whom were sex workers and homeless. These women would stay at, like, shelters. And you walk around the city and they're like, okay, well, this is, I think like it's in the West End of London. They're like, this is the West End. This used to be like a really bad part of town. And they're like, right here is what used to be a women's shelter. And right here, where this building is, there used to be a different building and it was a women's shelter. And this may have been one of the shelters that one of the women stayed at. And you're like,
maybe.
Yes, it's all very maybe. Yeah. And then like, they're like, they would have maybe run this way. And they say that it was probably about 10:30 in the morning, but there were no clocks unless you were really, really rich. So it was based on the bells of the church. And you're just like, okay, so literally no one knew anything.
Yep.
And then there was this like one letter that was sent into the newspaper.
Of a person claiming to be Jack the Ripper.
Yes. And so they're like, is Jack the Ripper one person? Was he a serial killer? Was it many men? Did one person kill one woman and some other guy was like, ooh,
copycat.
I could do the same thing? Yep. Like they literally have no idea. And it was so long ago. And because it would have been so easy to be a serial killer then. There are no clocks. There's no cameras. Nobody's watching you. There's no such thing as DNA at the time, like that you're aware of, you know, these kind of things. So yeah, you literally just had to be like, I can't be seen by someone and I can't keep the weapon and the bloody clothes.
Right.
The end.
Like pretty easy.
It would have been so easy. Today though, there's cameras everywhere.
On every street corner.
GPS tracking you everywhere. Like the government can track you if they want.
Yes. Yeah. And I think honestly, like cell phones are, and social media. Cell phones and social media protect people from that kind of thing. I mean, even think about just like, you know, somebody like Gabby Petito, right? That was murdered by her boyfriend. Right away, people were tipped off that something was amiss here because she was so like, you know, into social media and that sort of thing, that people were like, something's off. She's not been, you know, posting. She's not immediate red flags.
Yes.
In, you know, the 1880s in the West End in London, and nobody paying attention to any of that shit. None of it.
And especially they are not paying attention to the sex workers.
No.
Especially a homeless woman who's a sex worker.
Which is why I say, like, you know, serial killers have the belief, I think, that these people are, you know, somehow worthless or won't be missed or anything like that. That is not my personal belief. I believe that sex workers and those people have value and they have families and people that will miss them.
Yes.
Which obviously, like, I'm like, would never advocate for murdering somebody. That's just not something I'm about. But Haylie winced just a little, like, there's a few people that sometimes I daydream, like, or,
pedophiles
whatever.
And abusers and,
I know. And that's a whole other conversation. But today we're talking about serial killers, Haylie.
Yes.
Serial killers.
Yes.
So I wrote down that obviously, like, the height, like we've talked about, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yes.
Some of the most, well-known people, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy. These are all people that in that specific era, and kind of like cults, I do think that some of this is like attributed to the happenings in the world at the time.
Yeah.
Like, I think that some of that is honestly just a response to what's going on in the world. We have war, we have counterculture, we have all of these things. You think about like Manson family murders and what what they were doing and how that's influenced by that. So now let's talk about the types of people that serial killers tend to be. Because this is such a fascinating topic, which you've kind of already like touched on about them wanting attention.
Yes.
Which is so true for a lot of them. You got Son of Sam, you've got the Zodiac Killer. Those are people that are writing directly to, newspapers or police.
Coming up with codes.
Yes, figure it out. Catch me if you can type thing.
Yes.
But then you have your other people like Dahmer. That is not somebody that wanted the attention at all.
Nope, just wants to fly under the radar.
Yes. And honestly, Dahmer's such an interesting, person to study and read about and listen to podcasts about and watch documentaries about. And I know that they came out with, a movie about his life and his killings like a couple of years ago, which I still haven't watched.
There was that Netflix show like last year or 2 years ago. That was really good.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and I haven't watched it. I really need to.
It's fantastic. The one thing I hate is that a lot of the victims' families are still alive.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't really that long ago.
No.
And a lot of these people are not getting a say in these shows being made, and it's being sensationalized. And they're like, this was my real life that I lived this. That I lost somebody I loved.
Right.
And I don't want it sensationalized again, because they can't ever grieve and get over it in that situation.
Right.
But as somebody who this didn't happen to, it is fascinating. I do wish that they would get the consent or, pay these people whose families were victims,
were affected,
something like that. Just as a side note, continue.
Yeah. No, you're fine. So I just was going to say that, or I don't know if I was going to say this before, but then I started thinking about it, that, I am somebody that's very interested in true crime of all kinds, whether that be serial killers or, single murders or whatever it is. I am very fascinated in it. So there's kind of this running like question in the true crime community that's like, why true crime now? And I wrote down, my thought is it's absolutely sensationalization. You know, that people are so interested in the nitty gritty details of all of it and why and how and who and want to know all of the things about it. And the media absolutely steers into that because people are interested, and it's made people more interested.
And I think that like people are just interested in it because it's so out of the norm. Like the behavior is so weird that we are fascinated by it. But I also think that women in general are fascinated by it because women a lot of times are the victims.
Yes.
So we are interested in the psychology of it in a way to protect ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. There are also, a lot of serial killers, a couple just off the top of my head that men are the victims.
Yes.
Specifically gay men, typically. So Dahmer was someone who killed gay men or boys.
John Wayne
Gacy also killed men, boys. There's also like Herb Baumeister, who was a serial killer who was from northern Indiana, actually. I think he had a farm in like Noblesville or Westfield area, where he buried these boys.
Ooh, spooky.
Yes. He never got to the point of being convicted because he ended up taking his own life before that came to fruition because he saw it all kind of crumbling down around him. But something interesting about somebody like Herb Baumeister or somebody like BTK, Dennis Rader, who's the Bind, Torture, Kill. These were very normal people. BTK had a wife, kids, a normal life. Herb Baumeister had a normal life with kids and a wife. And somehow, some way, they are just slipping under the radar, killing people and like burying them in their yards. Or like, I think John Wayne Gacy may have also, I don't know if he was married or not, but he like definitely buried people in his yard. Like, how is this happen? Like, how did people not pay attention to it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like if you don't have neighbors nearby, if you live more out in a secluded area in the country, then, you know, people aren't really looking at what you're doing in your own yards, things like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like it would definitely be harder to do in like an addition. And,
right.
You know, you have an HOA, they would be like, what's this dirt patch in your yard all of a sudden?
But then also like think about somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer, who was living in an apartment building.
Yeah.
Who was like storing bodies in oil drums.
Yes. And then like in a hotel and then just like murdered someone and then just like put him in his suitcase and walked right out.
And then
I'm
like,
ugh.
I think with Dahmer, you know, it all kind of like blends together for me at some point. But I'm pretty sure that people eventually were like, something smells. Like there is something in this building and it's literally dead bodies.
Yes.
Like it's crazy to me.
Well, and with Dahmer specifically, so I guess that like he did have neighbors, which you should watch the show. But one neighbor in particular, I think she's still alive today. She kept calling the police to the point where they like wouldn't take her calls anymore. But she kept being like, there's suspicious activity. There's this young man who was here and he was drunk and outside naked and all of these things. But because Jeffrey Dahmer was gay and kind of weird,
they were just like,
they didn't want to deal with it. Yeah. They were just like, well, we're not going to question it because like it icks us out. Right. And so that's how he got away with it for so long.
Well, and let's not, forget to mention in the story of Jeffrey Dahmer too, of, you know, he was experimenting with doing certain things to these victims. I know at one point that he like injected like boiling water into like someone's brain, a young man. And that young man actually ended up escaping and getting out. And he, you know, is in the street, comes upon police officers, 2 police officers. And then Jeffrey rolls up and he's like, no, he's my cousin. He's confused, you know, like, or whatever.
This was the naked one. He said it was his boyfriend, but he was underage.
And again, like you said, they're very much like, okay, this is a domestic situation. And they want to be like, it's weird because this person is homosexual. Yes. And we're going to stay out of it.
Yes. And I'm like, you have to get involved. That's literally like what the police are for. Right. I mean, no, they're not. Like the Supreme Court actually said, no, they're not. But whatever. That's what police are supposed to be for.
Right. But yeah, protect and serve. Right. And that's just like not even to be inquisitive at all. But I think that's so like gone from our minds now of like, I don't think that would happen in today's world.
I do.
You do?
Yes.
You do?
I genuinely do.
I just don't know that somebody could get away with it really super well in today's world.
I just think that especially if it was something like that, where it was an awkward situation and it was a homosexual thing, there are a lot of areas in this country where an officer would be like, I don't want to deal with it. Yeah. Yuck. And I'm not going to get involved.
There is something to be said for like bystander, you know, that happens, that when someone or when a group of people, when so many people witness a horrible thing, like a murder, they all think that another person is going to do something about it or step in or whatever.
It's like how, as a woman, when you're younger, you're told, like, if you're being attacked, don't yell help, yell fire.
Yeah.
Because people are more likely to run towards you or call 911 than if you yell help, because everyone's like, well, someone else will deal with it.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So, so many interesting things to be said about serial killers. So, of course, we know they exist in this world. Yes. What do you think about serial killers in an awful world?
I don't think that they would exist in an awful world. And here's why. A lot of serial killers have, sometimes it's because they're, mentally ill in one way or another, but a lot of times they're bullied as kids. They're really isolated.
Head injuries, the McDonald triad, right?
There's a lot of things that play into when you're a kid that makes you turn out that way as an adult.
Yeah.
A lot of times also I've noticed, think Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy, it is like a sexual suppression thing.
It is.
A lot of serial killers are built on sexual harm. Even Ted Bundy, who that was a straight thing, but it's still just raping and murdering women.
Yeah. It's power, it's control.
Yes. But a lot of times it does come down to a sexual aspect. Yeah. And I just don't feel like in a world full of Haylies and Libbys that there would be a lot that would create an environment that would suppress certain things, that would create people like that.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think I'll tell you something else that I think contributes to this. We are both women. So naturally, we have the sensibilities of women. Now, we've discussed and said before that there would absolutely be men in an awful world.
There would have to be.
There would have to be. And I
always say, scientifically speaking.
Unfortunately. No, I'm kidding. I do. Some of my favorite humans are men, but not many. So, we have sensibilities of women. There are very, very few female serial killers.
Yes.
There's Eileen Wuornos, is probably the most popular one. But then, the rest of female serial killers, women murderers and serial killers tend to be more passive killers.
Yes.
So they are not crimes of passion type people. Eileen Wuornos is such a kind of just a rogue one because she definitely killed these men in very violent ways. That is not typical. Usually it's poisoning.
Yes.
Or slowly killing you with something else.
Well, because normally women's big thing is I'm being attacked. I'm being threatened.
Right.
What can I do to slow them down?
Right.
A lot of times, even with poisoning, it's I'm just trying to give you enough poison to have you not touch me.
Yeah.
And to keep you away from me and keep you sick enough that you can't come after me.
Right.
And eventually it's just kind of oops.
Yeah.
I overdosed you.
Except for I know, so there's a very, it's an old movie. It's a great movie if you ever get the chance to watch it. It's called Arsenic and Old Lace. And it is about these women who operate a kind of like a bed and breakfast type thing. And they kill men who come through. They poison them with arsenic.
I love that.
It's really a great movie. It's Cary Grant is in it, and these old women are his aunts. And I don't know if you've ever noticed at my desk, I have a sign that says, crazy doesn't run in my family, it practically gallops.
Yes.
That is a line from Arsenic and Old Lace. So that is how typically female serial killers tend to be. And again, there are not many of them. I believe that Arsenic and Old Lace is maybe loosely based on, well, now that I say that, I'm that movie came out in the mid 30s or 40s. It was a long time ago. Definitely predating that sort of thing. But I think that you're right that there are things in society that the conditions of society created these types of people.
Yes.
And it has to be that sort of suppressing who you truly are or being treated as if you're weird or something like that. Whereas I think when women kill people, it is because they are being oppressed or harmed. It's very, very rarely a situation where it's they're killing these men because they're wife beaters or whatever. And so they're repeatedly typically it's they killed this one person because this person was oppressing them or abusing them or whatever. So they don't often become serial killers.
Right.
It's just they do one killing and then they're free of that.
Yes.
Whether that be right or wrong, it's neither here nor there. But I don't think that we would have the conditions that would create that sort of situation. And I also just have a hard time believing that I would ever have the type of sensibility that's like, my solution is to kill people.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Now, how do you feel about the quote unquote serial killer genes?
I don't believe it.
I don't either.
I think, so in our cults episode, we talked about sociopaths. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of serial killers tend to be sociopaths. Maybe not all of them. I know Ted Bundy was certainly a sociopath. He was very charismatic.
Yes.
So that's something that people tend to not understand about serial killers is some of them are incredibly charismatic, which is how they get people to trust them. And then, they get tricked into being murdered. Mm-hmm. Ted Bundy a lot of times would pretend, he had a broken arm and I just need help, carrying these things to my car or whatever it was. So that's something that people don't typically think of serial killers as being, but they definitely are very charismatic people.
Yes.
So,
which, really quick.
No,
with Ted Bundy, I don't know if you remember, it would have been when we were in law school and they came out with
the Zac Efron movie.
Yes, the movie.
God,
and then there was
good.
The documentary and it was just boom, 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 Ted Bundy. It was all year was Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
And it was all fantastic. But they kept showing all this footage of him and people.
And the product was
women
people thought he was attractive.
Yes. Again, people thought he was attractive. And then there was this whole group of people who were stop saying he's attractive. He's not attractive. All these things. He's a serial killer. And it's here's the thing. Is he attractive by today's standard? Not particularly. No. However, if you look at, especially when Zac Efron was playing him, and when you put the pictures of them side by side, you were kind of wow, it is eerily similar.
Yeah.
So you can see that how back then he would have had what is today's a Zac Efron vibe.
Right.
He was very handsome for his time and he was charismatic.
Right.
So it's women back then did fall in love with him.
Yes.
They hear him talking and you do kind of are
Swoon.
ooh.
Yes.
But if you keep listening, you're shut the fuck up.
Right.
You are a narcissist and just an ass. And you killed all these women.
Yes.
But
that's how he did it.
But that's how he did it. And so what it proved was what he did the first time. It proved it again of how easy it was to swoon women and get his way and lure them in.
Well, even now, what I would say they're not serial killers, but they're murderers of 2024 that people are wait, are they kind of hot? Lyle and Eric Menendez, who famously killed their parents. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, people are familiar with the Menendez brothers' story, and all of a sudden are they're kind of hot. Wow, blah, blah, blah. It's something I don't understand, but it happens all the time. It happened when, Richard Ramirez was in prison. Women wrote to him and swooned over him and loved him. He was a horrible serial killer. I mean, truly a sick in the head person. But getting back to what we were talking about with the serial killer gene.
Yes.
I don't believe it because I'm more of the opinion that it's a question of nature versus nurture, right? Mm-hmm. Do I think that people have the gene to kill in their nature? Maybe.
Right.
But I do believe that it is the environment, it's their upbringing that creates them into a person that is going to kill people.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, if you study the childhoods of all these people, it all, like you said, it looks the same, right?
Yeah. None of them were oh, they were such a light in everyone's life.
Right.
And they, had such a supportive
family.
System.
Yes.
And, that's never the case.
No.
It was always they were weird. Their parents beat them. They were bullied in school.
They got mommy issues.
Yes. They dissected and murdered animals in the backyard. They were always the weird kid.
Right.
And it's yes, there was something in your genes that made you kind of weird. There just had to be. Sometimes that's part of it. And I think, so there are two genes that they call the serial killer genes, and those are MAOA and CDH13.
Okay.
Those are considered the serial killer genes.
Right.
And, but it's really just that those genes are linked to aggression.
Okay.
And violent behaviors. That's literally it. So it's if you already had genetics that were like, you are predisposed to violent outbursts and aggressive behaviors. And then on top of it, you're the weird kid.
Right.
You're bullied in school. Your parents beat you. You have no support system. You know, all of those things combined.
They compound over time.
That is what's going to make you a serial killer. And we just would never.
No.
You know, I'm not a mother. You're not a mother.
No.
But I can guarantee if you put any children in our care, we're not going to
treat them like that.
We would never treat them that way, you know, and I never treated other kids at school that way.
No.
And I don't think you would have either. And also, you know, as we've said, a lot of times there's like a sexual component to it. And a lot of times it's, you know, trying to suppress, you know, being gay or, you know, not being okay with your own sexuality, things like that, which like, I just think in an awful world, we're not going to care that people are gay.
No,
you know,
no.
So we're not going to
be who you are.
Yeah.
We're very much people that are, you know, accepting of whoever you are.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to be besties and I'm going to, you know, be a big fan of you as a person.
Right. Because sometimes people just suck.
Yeah. But that's got nothing to do with your sexuality.
No.
Be who you are.
Absolutely.
I want you to, you know, be true to thine own self. You know?
Exactly.
That's a super important thing. Just kind of jumping back to the gene thing. I also think it's a question of like correlation versus causation, right? Like if this is something that we've observed in the DNA of these serial killers, you know, does that mean that it's the cause of them becoming serial killers?
Absolutely
I don't think
not.
so.
No.
I don't think so at all. And yeah, in an awful world, you know, I tend to think that women, just as a species, do not have the desire to be sexually controlling of other people.
No.
So it's the reason why I think if we were a matriarchal society where women are in charge, you know, things like rape and, you know, murder are not going to be as prevalent because those are things that are supposed to be displays of power.
Right.
You know, like people are always like, well, you know, rape is a sexual thing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but it's about power.
Yes.
It's not about desire. It never is.
No.
It's about power.
Yeah.
And so I think that like very power hungry, like societies and things like that, they're going to be more prone to those sorts of things. And I think that is usually what contributes to men being serial killers is they have some sort of like a hatred of women a lot of times that they're going to, or hatred of their mother that now is translating as, you know, I'm going to kill these women that look like my mother or whatever. So I think, you know, with the age of profiling serial killers, I think it's bananas to suggest that it's in your DNA that you're going to become a serial killer.
It's
that's
wild.
just wild to me. And I think that's like why like profiling has become so good is because now we understand all these conditions that like lead to this person becoming who they are.
Yeah.
So my question though for you is, do you think that we don't have serial killers as much today in the modern era because of people are able to easily find like community more via like the internet and chat rooms and things like that? Like, do you think that, and here's what I'm thinking of, here's where my brain is going of like, there's this whole community, I don't know if you're aware of, the incel community. Do you know what incels are?
I've heard of it, but I cannot think of what it is right now.
Okay. So they are people who are involuntarily celibate because women don't like them or whatever.
Yes.
And so they all, you know, have their communities on like, God only knows, Reddit or whatever.
Yeah.
And so part of me is like, do these people not act out as much anymore because they understand and know there are other people in the world like them and they have this community of people that can relate to them so they don't feel the need to lash out? Or like, is something else going on? Is it truly just like the DNA, the technology's better, the science is better, the profiling's better, whatever?
I think it's the technology is better and they're afraid that they will get caught.
Interesting.
Because if you think about it, it's not like we're running low on murderers.
No, definitely not.
You know, but they're getting caught faster.
Yeah.
So the chances of being a serial killer go down.
Yeah.
Because you have to wait and then do it again.
Yeah, right.
And then
Cooling
wait
off period.
and do it again. So if you're having to wait, if you're getting caught in the meantime, like if everyone's having their whole world online, it's so much easier to notice when somebody's gone.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that these people are snapping still. People are still being murdered. But I think that they're like, I've gotten away with it.
Yeah.
Don't do it again. Or they're being caught before they can.
Yeah.
So, and I think that some people are just like, I've seen other people get caught. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Because especially in this day and age, it's not just that there's, the police and the DNA and the technology. But there's the tracking, there's all of that, but there's the TV shows that teach you about it.
Yeah.
There's the podcasts that are all about it, podcasts that have solved cold cases.
Yeah.
People just think it's fun to get involved in this stuff now.
To be armchair experts on it. Investigators.
Yes. So not only do you have the police looking out for this, but communities
of people
online
that's true
are looking out for it. So I think that it's literally to the point where I'm sure there are still serial killers out there, but they're like, I'm not going to send anything in because I'll be caught immediately.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do the same murder every time and have my calling card because I'll be caught. I think that they're flying much more under the radar if they're still there. And I think that hopefully all the true crime shows and podcasts and, all of that, plus the technology, hopefully it's deterring people in the long run.
Well, and I also think too, this is just something that occurred to me, that it's so much harder again still to get away with it because now law enforcement talks to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, CIA and the FBI, created I don't know. The FBI was like in the 30s when it really became a thing. I'm not really sure about the CIA, maybe the 60s, but they did not talk to each other.
No.
They didn't talk to each other, which is wild because they're both, top intelligence agencies that are for our country and they're not talking to each other. Think about that's two large places that are not communicating. That local police departments and law enforcement they are not talking to each other. So you have somebody who's like the Green River Killer, the I-70 killer, something like that, where they're kind of traveling and then, hitting this spot and hitting this spot and then going to this place. And and Ted Bundy was very much like that too. Yeah. He started kind of going throughout the country. If you're not talking to each other, then you're not picking up on these, things that are, well, that's kind of weird. This same thing happened, this MO is happening somewhere else and maybe there's some sort of connection there that we can follow. So I don't know. That's something that just occurred to me too, is that I do think that law enforcement nowadays is a lot better at communicating with each other about what they're seeing and because we have the technology to have these systems
and databases that share them.
Yes, that have this information this picking up on these things. Can we filter out, are there crimes that have, X, Y, and Z going on in them?
Mm-hmm. It's like how my mom always says that she could plan the perfect murder, but she doesn't know what to do with the teeth. Yes. She's like, every show has taught me that's how you get caught. The teeth. And so there's one deterred right there.
Yeah, absolutely. One person deterred.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
well, I also do think too, just kind of as a last thought in my case, at least, is that I think there's a question of shifting motivations in our society. And I think that's because our society has changed so much since that time. That, motivation now is maybe less sexualized or whatever. And now we're having, more of these mass murderers. And the reason that we have mass murderers too is because they don't become serial killers because there's often this going out in a blaze of glory, right? This martyrdom of people are going to know my name. I'm the person that did this, and I feel like that's also quite sensationalized, which is why it's become so much more popular. Even with just, thinking about a recent example of a lot of people don't know the name of the United Healthcare CEO that was killed.
Right.
But everybody knows Luigi Mangione, everybody knows that name. Like, that's what media has done to this. It's made martyrs out of these people. It's made celebrities out of these people. And I think they feed off that, which is, I think that kind of stuff is going to continue to perpetuate.
But I also think that, with, we see a lot more, unfortunately, school shootings.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people know that if they shoot all these kids in this school, they're not coming out alive, more than likely, kind of a thing.
I think almost always they go into these situations knowing they're not going to come out alive.
Yes. But with these things, these are the same people who feel alone in the world.
Yes.
And, and so we already have these people who they could go find groups to find that they're not alone in the world.
Right.
And they won't, or they can't, or, they just, even if they find other people, the people who are near them, that is the people they want to hurt the most.
Right.
Because those are the people who have hurt them. So they're going to do whatever they're going to do. Something mentally breaks, you know? And so I think a lot of times they're going into this thinking that they'll just get killed too. Yeah. And that'll be a good out for them instead of turning into a serial killer.
Yeah, in a sense, it's like suicide by cop, right? Like they know that they're, like you said, they know they're not coming out alive. I think we have a lot to learn as a society about the motivations of mass shooters versus like serial killers. I think we've learned a lot about why serial killers become serial killers. And now we have that to learn about mass shooters. And it's my hope that with that knowledge, we can, start to develop more preventative measures. Because honestly, and this is not a conversation for now, but like, I just think that we need to focus on that in our country as opposed to like, I don't know that gun control is necessarily the whole answer. Like, we need to get to the bottom of why people are doing this, what's causing them to do it. And then we can talk about their access to firearms and how that perpetuates the problem. But it's a mental health issue in our country.
100%.
That we got to get on top of.
100%. But I also think that that's why it's more like gun control, not taking guns away.
Right.
But, making sure people who aren't in those mental spaces don't have access to those kind of things.
But then it's like, how do we define, who's somebody that should have access versus somebody that shouldn't have access? And then, it just becomes a whole conversation of, all of, it's such an arbitrary line.
Right.
That it's like, how do we decide? How do we say... I think we need more education in our country in terms of firearms.
Absolutely.
People are going to be around firearms. People have firearms, and they're always going to in this country. And so, let's make sure that people know how to safely, exist around firearms. Yes. But again, a conversation for another time. But just I think it's interesting that we've moved into the age of more like mass killings versus serial killings.
Yes.
Like it was for like our parents, like latchkey kids. That was such a big fear, I think, of like serial killers and whatever.
But also, like, even then, it was such a big deal that like people just didn't know where their kids were, that they had to have commercials with celebrities being like, "It's 9:00. Do you know where your kids are?"
Right. Like,
and I'm like,
that's
why
so
are
disturbing
you a parent if you don't know where your children are? Kind
so
of a
disturbing
thing,
to me.
And so I'm like, that's why they were serial killers. You could snatch anyone.
Easy. It was easy. Yeah.
Nowadays, everybody's kids inside. So
yeah, absolutely. Playing on their Switch.
That's right.
Whatever,
So watching the TikToks.
It's me. I'm watching the TikToks.
Same.
Well, do you have anything else to say about serial killers?
No, other than we wouldn't have them.
Yeah,
our world
we definitely
would be
wouldn't have them. See our full conversation for reasons why we wouldn't have them.
Exactly.
Which I think we've peppered throughout.
That's right.
So thanks for joining us for this episode. I know we've gotten like some kind of like dark, like sociological issues, but we have more topics coming up that are perhaps a little bit lighter.
Yes.
A little bit more fun to talk about. I mean, not fun to talk about. This is so fun for me to talk about.
We're having a great time.
But maybe less dark for you to listen to. Anyway, again, just before we hop off, I want to remind you, Patreon, I promise I won't double plug it every time. But please check out our Patreon. We would love your support. Patreon.com/An Awful World Podcast. Remember that, one of the tiers, you could submit topics to us. We want to hear about what you want to hear in an awful world. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, all the socials. Yeah. Just kidding. We don't have a TikTok, so don't look for us there.
And we're not going to start one anytime soon because it might be banned here. I mean, maybe if the ban goes away, we'll talk about it.
Who knows what's going to happen in this world? But until then, we sincerely hope that your day is simply awful.